The Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra or the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Which one should you get if you care a lot about the camera? Well, we've done a lot of testing. Everything from outdoor tests to zoom at multiple different levels, ultrawide tests, macros, portrait, pet, object, person, raw, slow motion, and literally everything else. So without any further ado, here's how they both compare. Oh, and if you're thinking of pre-ordering an S25, that's literally any model, you can save up to $1,250 plus get $900 of instant trade-in credits plus up to $350 of extra Samsung credits by using our exclusive link in the description box down below. Okay, so let's start off with some outdoor photos on the main module, starting with a shot of Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. The biggest difference here is when it comes to the color and the sharpness. You can probably tell right away that the iPhone is significantly sharper, especially if you take a look at the grass in the foreground. This is due to the iPhone taking the photos at a 24 megapixel resolution by default compared to the 12 megapixels on the Samsung. Now, you can manually toggle the S25 to also shoot in 50. It's just annoying that you'd have to do that literally every single time you open up the camera app. The good news is that at a distance, the S25 Ultra's 50 megapixel shot will of course have much more detail than Apple's 24. Although, if we're just talking about default settings, then the iPhone's going to be much better here. As for the colors, the S25 is more vibrant, which I personally do prefer, although there is quite a bit of banding in the sky here. It's pretty much the same story in the second shot here with a distant view of San Francisco. The colors do look quite similar, but the moment we zoom in, the iPhone doesn't need to have noticeably more detail. And once again, for whatever reason, the S25 seems to have a lot of banding in the sky, including some noise, which should definitely not be happening here. By the way, something quite interesting happening in this third photo here, with a wide view of San Francisco from our hiking spot. You'll see that when we zoom in, the S25 is actually the one with more detail, at least when it comes to the distant buildings. The close-up bushes are much sharper on the iPhone. And I also much prefer the shadows on the iPhone here too. I do find Samsung's to be just way too bright and washed out. So really, when it comes to everyday photos, I have to give the win to the iPhone here, as you're not only getting much sharper photos by default, but you also don't get any of those weird banding artifacts and noise in the sky that the S25 Ultra is having. Moving on to some indoor shots, I took this one at the Sharks hockey game that Samsung took us to, and I actually do prefer Samsung's shot here. Sure, the iPhone's more detailed, but just take a look at how washed out the crowd is in the foreground. However, in this shot of Ren, the iPhone was able to handle the cloth textures much better. Just take a look at how much sharper they are, and same goes for Ren's hair here. And here, the iPhone manages to expose the entire image so much better if you take a look at the light, or really just the shadows in the entire image. Or here, where if we zoom into the basal jar, or any of them really, there is significantly more detail in the iPhone's photo. So I feel like when it comes to indoor shots, the iPhone is still the best choice here as well. So what about zoom? Well, Samsung does actually have two zoom modules, a 3x and a 5x, whereas Apple only has a single 5x. So just to be fair, we've taken all of these zoom shots at 5x or above. At 5x, they are surprisingly similar. The iPhone does have slightly more detail if you take a look at the bird, although not by much. Now, in this example, Samsung does actually have noticeably more detail and also better image processing as well. Moving on to 10x, we've got a view of the Alcatraz prison here. Thumbs up for that. And surprisingly, while the S25 Ultra is indeed more detailed, the difference is only marginal. I have noticed that the windows of the main Alcatraz building do look very weird on the iPhone, which does make me think that maybe Apple's using some sort of generative AI to replace them. Now, if we move on to 30x, this is where Samsung starts to shine, as we do get noticeably more detail in the building in the middle. Although, considering that Samsung's 5x module has a 50 megapixel resolution compared to Apple's 12, I was actually expecting more from Samsung here. And lastly, at 100x, you can see slightly more detail on the S25, as you can kind of make out that this is a house, but it does seem to be mostly over sharpened detail rather than the natural image detail being present. So all in all, yes, Samsung does have better zoom capabilities than the iPhone, but the iPhone is not that far off, which I'm really surprised to see given Samsung's 4 times higher resolution on their telephoto module. Which brings me to the Ultrawide, which is where things get really interesting, as this is literally the only camera module that got updated on both, with a 48 and 50 megapixel sensor from their previous 12. We'll compare their default 12 megapixel resolution first, and here, the S25 Ultra does seem to have more detail if you take a look at the pier. However, the S25 Ultra does have that banding once again in the sky. In the second example, the S25 Ultra just nails the exposure. For some reason, the iPhone just destroyed the shadows here. As for the sharpness, they are quite similar. And in this third example, we can see pretty well that Samsung does give you a wider field of view, which I'd say is probably the main difference between these two ultrawides, at least in daytime. We will be taking a look, by the way, at nighttime ultrawides and their high-res modes as well later in the video. But first, we've got macro, which is also improved on both thanks to their new ultrawides. And here, I do prefer the S25 Ultras, as it's just got a bit more focus compared to the iPhone. Like, you can see more stuff, more detail. Although in this example, that's from a bit further away, the iPhone is the one that's more detailed. All in all, their macros are actually quite similar. So what about portrait mode? Well, we've got person, pet, and object portraits here. Starting off with portrait person at 5x, the edge separation is really good on both. If you take a look at my hair, but man, the S25 Ultra looks so much higher res. The background blur is also more pronounced on the S25 Ultra, and the image processing overall is also better too, with the iPhone looking just way too washed out. If we move on to portrait mode pet, Samsung does do a much better job here. The background blur is just perfect. Like, look at how well it managed to separate Ren's individual hairs. Whereas the iPhone decided to focus on Ren's face more, giving us this gradual blur throughout the photo. Still, I much prefer Samsung's portrait here. And even when it comes to portrait mode object, just take a look at how much better the S25 Ultra is. The iPhone literally blurred out the main subject here. So yeah, there's absolutely no competition here. The S25 Ultra's portrait mode is just miles better than the iPhone's. Now, something that I love doing is shooting raw photos that I can then edit later, especially at the sensor's full resolution. So here we go, 48 megapixels on the iPhone versus 50 on the S25 Ultra. So after the edits, the iPhone recovers way more shadow detail, and as you can see, it also has a cleaner sky. Samsung's sky is kind of mushy with some banding as well. Sharpness-wise, the iPhone shows more detail in the bricked road on the bottom and also in the building here, while Samsung does give you better detail if you take a look at the bushes. Now, Samsung does have one big advantage, and that is you can now shoot 200 megapixel raw photos on the S25 Ultra, so you're no longer stuck at 50 megapixels like with the S24 Ultra. And surprisingly, the 200 megapixel mode actually has better dynamic range and way more detail than the 50 megapixel mode. So yeah, I wouldn't even bother with a 50 megapixel mode anymore. Yes, the iPhone can still recover more shadow detail, but Samsung isn't that far behind, and the insane detail just pulls me towards the S25 Ultra here. Now, both can also do RAW on their ultrawide modules, 48 megapixels on the iPhone and 50 on the Samsung. After editing, the iPhone once again has way more dynamic range, and it is sharper overall. If you tried pushing the Samsung this far, the image quality would simply just break. So if you want the best raw photo editing experience for recovering highlights and shadows, the iPhone wins. But the S25 Ultra does have one cool trick, which is virtual aperture in expert RAW, letting you shoot portrait photos in RAW at different apertures. And this actually works pretty well. Now, January has been quite an intense month for me, traveling to Samsung Unpacked in San Francisco and to Slovenia with Honor the week before. And while I've been busy, we've dropped 9 new packs in our app wallpapers. Here are my top 3, starting with Fluid Fusions by Hanane. This pack has that clean Apple aesthetic, but it also looks stunning on the S25 Ultra and the Pixel 9 Pro as well. Number 2, Calm Currents by Wallrod. This is another striking landscape pack with a body of water that splits the frame perfectly. And number 3, Chinese Celebration by Ali. This stylized pack actually comes with 12 designs for the very first time for each of the zodiac animals, and I just love cropping in and being able to create my perfect lock screen that way. Let me know your favorites in the comments down below, and you can check out close to 1,500 8K wallpaper designs in our app Wallpapers for iOS and Android, which you can download for free by using the links below. Which brings me to video. Starting off with 4K 60 video, I'm honestly surprised by how much Samsung has managed to improve their video here. Like, it is almost entirely on par with the iPhones, which is well known to be the king in terms of video in the smartphone industry. Now, the iPhone is still slightly better if we take a look at Aperture here, as there's more shadow detail, and the image is also more detailed and brighter overall. But for the most part, they are very, very similar. Now, both can also shoot in log, which is ideal for maximizing detail. The iPhone can also shoot in ProRes, which gives it an insane bitrate of 700 megabits per second, as opposed to 96 on the Samsung, and that's also with high bitrate mode enabled. And to be honest, after grading, the Samsung is considerably sharper than the iPhone. However, it does seem to have more noise. It just looks higher res, so yeah, great job Samsung. Especially since we don't have to deal with these massive file sizes of ProRes. And moving on to slow motion, they can both do 4K 120 slow-mo, but as you can see, there's just a massive difference in terms of the image processing. Samsung's footage is overly dark, whereas the iPhone's is just perfectly exposed. Although the wheel itself does seem to be more detailed on the Samsung. Also, on the Samsung, you can actually hold your finger on the video file, and then using Galaxy AI, it would add the extra frames in, and essentially slow down the footage even more. However, it may create some artifacts like you can probably see from our example. The Samsung can also do 8K video, whereas the iPhone maxes out at 4K. And comparing the two, the Samsung is definitely more detailed if you like to zoom in, but at the same time, the image processing does take a significant hit, especially at the start of the video. And you're also limited to shooting in 30 FPS as opposed to 60 or 120 like in 4K. Moving on to ultrawide video, they're both pretty good, but the iPhone is just way more detailed. Like, even more detailed than in the main module video. Everything looks higher res, and maybe part of that is the bitrate. Like, we've got a 72 megabits per second bitrate on the iPhone compared to 50 on the Samsung, which is a pretty significant difference. Then we've got the telephoto video at 15x, which is honestly really poor on both. Like, Samsung is slightly better as we can see more details on the fence, although I wouldn't call any of them usable here. So in terms of daytime video, the iPhone is still the best here, but Samsung is actually closer than ever this year. Which brings me to night video. Samsung said that they have significantly improved night video this year, and yeah, it's still far inferior compared to the iPhones. There's just so much noise in Samsung's footage, and it just lacks that clean look that the iPhone footage has. But at the end of the day, I wasn't expecting to see a miracle here, as we are still working with the same sensor as last year. So all the night video improvements are really just thanks to the Snapdragon 8 Elite chip rather than any specific hardware improvements. Now, there is one place where the S25 Ultra is actually better in terms of night video, and that is when it comes to using the telephoto module. Here, at 5x, the S25's telephoto performs miles better than the iPhone's, which is just mushy and with almost zero detail. And that's likely due to its sensor size. The iPhone has a much smaller 1/3.06 telephoto sensor as opposed to the 1/2.52-inch sensor on the S25 Ultra. So what about night photos? Well, in the first example, Samsung just destroys the iPhone, as the iPhone just decided to focus I don't even know where, as most of the image is just way too blurry. The second example is a bit more comparable. In fact, Samsung was the one that failed to get the head of the hedgehog entirely in focus, and the iPhone is also a bit brighter here. In his third example, wow, they both managed to turn the scene into almost daylight. Even more so when it comes to the S25, which did brighten up the trees more. But then here, it seems like the iPhone is the one that gathered more light, whereas Samsung was more detailed if you take a look at the right side of the fence. So all in all, they are quite similar in terms of night mode photos, although I do find the S25 to be slightly superior. So what about night zoom? This is where Apple is known to be terrible at. And yeah, that's still true. Like, just take a look at how much more detail we have on the S25 Ultra here. Yes, the image is darker, but everything is just noticeably higher res. So what about their brand new Ultrawides? Well, this is where Samsung seems to be noticeably more detailed. Take a look at how much sharper the grass is, whereas on the iPhone, this is just a mess. Now here, yes, the iPhone does have more natural colors, but take a look at how much more detail there is in this scene as well. In Samsung's photo, if you take a look at a house, the brickwork is actually visible. Or if you take a look at a tree on the left, you can actually see the individual branches, whereas on the iPhone, that's just really, really difficult. So yeah, Samsung's Ultrawide is just so much better at night. But okay, what about night portrait? Well, as you can see, they're both terrible. In fact, my face isn't even visible at all in Samsung's photo. Galaxy sensor, I guess? Anyway, we had to take a second shot, and yeah, it was more visible in this one, but then again, still pretty bad. And for some reason, Samsung even failed to apply the portrait mode effect, whereas Apple, well, it did apply it, but just look at how noisy my face is. So yeah, none of these are usable here. As for front night, they're both pretty poor, but Samsung is slightly better. If you take a look at my jumper, you can see some texture, which is entirely gone on the iPhone. And my face is also more detailed, especially if you take a look at my hair. So what about front day? Well, they're surprisingly similar here. The field of view is almost identical, and even the sharpness is extremely similar on both. The main difference really is the color. The iPhone really messed up the colors here, as my hair looks black rather than brown like it normally is. So props to Samsung for nailing the colors here, and also the shadow detail in the background. Okay, so this is a front-facing video test between the S25 Ultra and the iPhone 16 Pro Max. The Golden Gate Bridge behind me, so yeah, let me know which one looks better, but then also which one sounds better. So this is the sound coming out of the S25 Ultra, and this is the sound coming from the iPhone 16 Pro Max. So yeah, let me know. What do you think? So yeah, for me, the S25 just looked way better. The iPhone raised the shadows way too much, although I did prefer the audio on the iPhone, and also the wider field of view. As for front portrait, they're both extremely similar when it comes to the background separation, as in both did a decent job with my hair, although not a perfect one. The colors on the Samsung are once again a bit more natural, as my hair is noticeably darker on the iPhone than it should, but other than that, they're both pretty good. But okay, let's say you've taken all these photos, and now you want to edit them. Which phone has the better editing experience? Well, the iPhone's very basic. The only AI editing feature is cleanup, which lets you remove objects or subjects from a photo, although compared to the same feature on the Samsung, the iPhone just doesn't work that well, as you can probably see, and the removed area always ends up looking very messy. And that's really it. The iPhone doesn't really have anything else, aside from just these basic edits. The S25 Ultra has so many others. For example, you can rotate and reframe a photo, and then Galaxy AI would automatically generate the missing areas. Or you can even sketch whatever you want in an image, and Galaxy AI would generate that for you. In this case, I wanted to add a cat companion for Ren, but yeah, it didn't really work that well. And it added some other dogs instead, which do look a bit weird, I gotta say, but still, it is a pretty cool feature. Now, when it comes to video edits, they both allow you to isolate voices in a video clip. However, Samsung's Audio Razor is just way more advanced, in the sense that it can automatically detect music, voices, or any specific background noise, and then you can select those specific ones and remove them from the video. Just listen for yourselves.
I'm not sure this one's there for me to talk about Switch 2, but it maybe highlights the use cases in Switch 1 that might be useful to me.
Maybe, yeah, especially like you said, the party games.
Just a party game is basically just a week.
Yeah.
Like, I've to be even scored the event game like a beat point with like just Wii Sports.
Whereas Apple lets you tweak the way the microphones pick up the audio. And if you play around with these options, you can also remove background noises. You just don't have the option to remove them individually like you can on the Samsung. Now, one area where Samsung claims they've also improved heavily this year is when it comes to the shutter lag. This used to be quite severe on previous Samsung phones, but now, when you're shooting in the default 12-megapixel mode, it seems to be almost as fast as the iPhone, which, by the way, is shooting in 24. Switching to 50-megapixel JPEGs on both, the iPhone is once again faster, but not by much, and if we switch to 50-megapixel RAW on both, that's where the iPhone is quite a bit faster. But all in all, the S25 Ultra is definitely improved here. Okay, so in conclusion, which one has the better camera? The S25 Ultra or the iPhone 16 Pro Max? Well, honestly, I'm disappointed in both, in the sense that they're both good, but none of them is amazing. None of them impressed me as much as the Vivo X300 Pro has, which is truly next level, or the Xiaomi 14 Ultra with its gigantic 1-inch main sensor. I feel like both Samsung and Apple have decided to do the bare minimum in recent years when it comes to the camera upgrades. Both have been using the exact same main sensor for the past 3 years. So all the improvements that we got are in terms of the image processing, and that new Ultrawide, that's also good, but not amazing. Still, both are great choices if you're looking for an overall consistent camera experience. The iPhone is the better choice if you mostly take outdoor shots, as there's just a ton of extra detail there. Same goes for indoor shots. RAWs also have better dynamic range, and video, both day and night, is just miles better on the iPhone, with the exception of log video, interesting enough. Whereas Samsung is better at zoom, although only slightly, portrait mode shots, which are significantly better, night mode photos from all modules, as well as all the front stuff, and the editing experience, which is miles better compared to the iPhone. So all in all, it just depends on what you're looking for the most. And I think that if Samsung were to release a software update to let us just shoot all the main photos at 50 megapixels resolution by default, or even 24, then that would already take away the two strongest wins of the iPhone, outdoor and indoor photos. But yeah, which one would you guys pick and why? Do subscribe to see how the S25 Ultra compares to the S24 Ultra camera-wise. Don't forget to check out our app Wallpapers for some amazing designs, all in 8K, that would just look amazing on your smartphone, tablet, and desktop. And if you want to order an S25, any of the S25 models, then don't forget to check the link in the description for an exclusive discount and offer. I'm Daniel, doing ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.